Just take in the fresh mountain air.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
Hi everyone, it's Dutchy, and I welcome you to my very new project. Now, before we get started, before we dig into what this park is going to be all about, I just want to tell you why I'm doing a new project in the first place. Many years ago, someone you may know as N7, I call him Mike, taught me that your park should always have a history, a location, a budget, and a future. Without these four elements, you'll just be freewheeling and in the end you'll get stuck. Now, this was back in the day when we were all still playing Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. So this advice was dispensed to me 7 or 8 years ago at least, and I always ignored it. I always thought, well, I just want to do what makes me happy. Budgets be damned, I'll just pretend my park has infinite buckets of money, and I'll just be building at my heart's content, and that should make me pleased. And the truth is, it kept me pleased for about the first 30% of the park. But after that, I would always inevitably get stuck. Not seeing a way out, 70% of the park still undeveloped, and quite frankly lacking any inspiration or motivation to move on. This happened to me again just a few weeks ago. I tried to soldier through it, but I just couldn't finish this park even though it was so small, so tiny. Just couldn't see where it was going. So for a brand new project, I'm heeding N7's advice, and this is why Holzpark has a history, a location, a budget, and a future. Holzpark is set in the magnificent Alps, somewhere in a gray area between France, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and Italy. It's not Liechtenstein. Anyway, it has something of all four of these countries. Definitely is going to be an alpine park. I would say it sits somewhere in a German-speaking region, hence the name Holzpark. Holzpark is a portmanteau of Holzmühle and Amusement Park. Holzmühle being a lumber mill, and that one will sit right here in this completely undeveloped patch. I think the border will be somewhere in the bend, and of course the other one will be the road right here. The lumber mill was built, or I should say founded, in 1887, 100 years before I was born. 70 years later, the founder decided to add a couple of simple flat rides and a restaurant. Maybe production was being scaled back, or he wanted to incentivize his workers for coming in more, or somehow tapping into an additional source of revenue, who knows. But first I'll be building the lumber mill. You'll see a lumber processing building with a chimney and cargo tracks. You'll see a sawing area. You'll see a part where we store the lumber. So it'll look very industrial, but also a bit old and outdated in a charming way. Once that's finished, and of course I'll show everything in the video, I'll be adding a carousel, maybe another flat ride, or maybe I invent something that you could play together back in the day, like 3D chess made of wood pieces, or jeu de boules, something. And of course, a restaurant. And that will be the start of Holzpark in 1957. Now, before I move on, The park isn't only set in the Alps. What is more important is that it's nearby a affluent spa town. If I'm tempted, I may add a bit of that spa town here at the very end, or maybe just a church and a hotel peeking through. But we'll see. It's important to know that it is close to a spa town because, of course, this brings in the visitors. This is not going to be a huge park, so I don't think you'll ever see more than, say, 600 visitors in this park. Now, even though it has modest beginnings, I can imagine that at one point, somewhere in the early 2000s, the park will decide to buy up farmland across the creek. I'll tell you more about that creek in a moment. I think the only two parts for sale will be this piece right here, the one that's cut off diagonally, and the rectangular part next to it. Why? Well, that would mean that I kind of have a nice sort of oval shaped area on the end, and I could definitely work with that. But naturally, since it's founded in the 50s, in the 50s in 1957, I reckon somewhere in the 60s we'll first see a roller coaster and more flat rides. Then in the 80s and 90s we'll see more modern rides, maybe a steel coaster, a drop tower, that sort of thing. And then in 2000s and 2010s we'll see the stuff that we see today in the amusement parks. The color schemes of those rides built in certain areas should also somehow be reflecting the era. So I imagine the 60s and 70s stuff to be more earth, orange, brown, and yellow. 80s and 90s, I'm guessing a bit more red, blue, and silver. And the 2000s and 2010s, more stark colors and more modern architecture. As for the land currently available, everything between the imaginary border here at the bend and the diagonal road is or belongs to the lumber mill. So we can do whatever we want with all of the beautiful autumn foliage and autumn trees sitting right here. But I also kind of want to keep some of that intact. So I don't want to turn this into a nature amusement park that you see sometimes, but I do want it to still feel a bit like it's somewhere set in nature. Now, about that creek, which is actually based on a river rapids ride that gives this beautiful kind of texture and life to the creek. It's a very shallow creek, kind of thing you would see in the Alps a lot. It cannot be modified. Its course may not be altered. It cannot be part of a flat ride or a tracked ride. The only permit the park will ever get is to build, I would say, maximum of 3 bridges across the river. A creek, I should say. Probably 2, thinking of it now. Because what is so typical for the Alps, everything is heavily guarded and heavily protected. And so this is kind of where we are right now. So I made a very simple base map amounting to 3.3 thousand scenery pieces, most of it trees, of course. I used terrain paint to create the surrounding farmlands. I didn't want it to be too rich in detail, and I wanted to keep the scenery count low. But also I just didn't want it to be too distractive. So once you sit somewhere in a roller coaster on top of a hill, I just want you to see the farmlands, but it just, it should be just be a blur. And I think that was easily achieved by using terrain paint. We won't be zooming in much into the surrounding areas in the near future. It will, of course, much focus on the actual park. So I thought this would do the trick, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. It's rather flat, so we just have to imagine that this is a valley. Funny enough, the map is actually an island in a lake, even though it has mountain. It's a weird map, but we'll just imagine this is a valley in the Alps. What else is there? Not much to tell you for this first episode. Like I said, I may or may not be adding the modest beginnings of the spa resort right here. If I somehow fancy a change, I may add a couple of typical alpine houses, farmhouses spread across the map. But again, I'm not going to be doing too much detailing. The season is autumn. I expect to work on this park in autumn and winter. Naturally, the spooky season should definitely provide us with some interesting details. And that's where we are right now. It's a short episode. I just wanted to show you where we are. And I look forward to showing you the beginnings of the lumber mill in the next one. And before you leave, if this is a project you'd like to keep a tab on, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your way out. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.